During the 1993 WCW European Tour, talent was being run thin. They would get on a bus for 3.5 hours, wrestle at a show, then travel 9 more hours until they finally made it back to their hotel. It goes without saying what extensive travel and lack of sleep can do to a person. However, things go even farther over the edge into the abyss when you realize that they were drinking this entire time. According to Colonel Robert Parker, Sid Vicious would even go so far as to take a massive amount of steroids before the trip. He was the biggest he had ever been at this point and knew he wouldn't have the chance to bulk up once he was overseas. The wrestlers were low on morale and even lower on food, and when they finally made their way back to the hotel, they were offered nothing more than sandwiches. However, while you would think a nice sandwich, a cold drink, and a soft place to lay their head would be something that the wrestlers would jump at, food and rest were the last things on their minds. Resident alcoholic Steve Austin, years before he would become the rattlesnake that we all know and love, would talk the hotel employees into opening the hotel bar. This would surely keep the party going, with several of the men already pushed towards insanity at this point. With everyone drinking, Sid would ask Arn Anderson what's wrong with our business today, why weren't they able to draw any money? The WCW around this time weren't doing very well financially, losing around $23 million in revenue. Sid's answer to this was Ric Flair. He felt that Rick, who was 44 at the time, was holding back the younger guys and refused to take the fall to anyone. The next thing you know, beer is flying across the table, with Arn and Sid throwing beer bottles at each other. WCW head of security Doug Dillinger would break up the squabble, sending the wrestlers up to their room for the night. If this was the end of the story, then we wouldn't be talking about this today. The amount of bar fights that happen on screen on and off are so prevalent that this situation probably seemed like nothing. However, what happened next would solidify this story as one of the most violent barroom brawls in wrestling history. As Sid is leaving to go to his room, he claims that Arn Anderson and a bunch of other men were in the hallway taunting him. Arn would break his beer bottle and threaten to cut Sid Vicious. Sid, who had been sleep deprived, starved, and according to Colonel Robert Parker, full of roid rage, would find it hard to sleep, obsessing over what Arn Anderson said to him. "Man, this motherfucker, I have a bad temper too. I said this threw a beer bottle broken? You know, you have to draw a line. There was a chair sitting right there, so I broke a leg off it, and I was gonna whack him in his head a couple of times." Colonel Parker would state that as Arn is looking through the peephole of his door, Sid would tell him that he wants to go to bed on better terms and that he should open the door and shake hands with him like a man. Arn Anderson, who was shaving with a pair of scissors, opens the door as Sid hits him over the head with the leg of the chair. These series of events would differ from person to person, but according to Sid's take of the story, Sid would go to Arn Anderson's hotel room and knock on the door. He says that he simply wants to work it out like men so they can go to sleep in peace. Sid hears Anderson stumbling around his room, probably on pills, so he says, "This is stupid. So I threw the thing." You can look at police records, the stick had not one drop of blood, not one dent in it like it had been hit or nothing. As Sid's recollection continues, he states that Arn comes out as his back is turned to go to his hotel. When he turns around, he sees Arn with the scissors in hand. I just went just like this with him and I said, "Hey man, this has gone too far." And he stood there coming right after me. According to Bill Dundee's take of the story, Sid ran from Arn. As Arn chased him, he struggles to get his keys into his hotel room door and is stabbed multiple times by Arn Anderson. From Sid Vicious's point of view of the story, he says that all he remembers about the stabbing is Arn lunging at him and him seeing the bloody scissors fall out of his stomach. The sheer adrenaline and alcohol as well as lack of sleep probably kept Sid from feeling any of this. Arn would go for the scissors a second time as Sid Vicious would stop him. This would however lead to Sid Vicious having the scissors and result in Arn Anderson being stabbed over 20 times. I go down the steps and I see blood galore. Blood on the left, blood on the right, blood all down the hallway and shit. I keep on walking and I'm in the hallway with a goddamn towel. I get down there and Sid Vicious and Arn Anderson are down there just brawling. They were covered in blood. Sid Vicious got the scissors and got Arn Anderson by the hair, and he's booting him in the face, stabbing him with the scissors every which way. Arn Anderson got blood spitting out of him like a horror movie and shit, man. I see Sid kicking Arn Anderson's nose, and it does a 180 turn straight the up and shit. I'm like, damn. Sid says at this point he can hear Arn saying, Man, you're f***ing me. However, according to Too Cold Scorpio, this was actually him saying, hey man, you're f***ing the dude. Sid looks down and realizes what he's doing to Arn and stops. The pair would be broken up by Too Cold Scorpio, who says there is blood everywhere at this point. On the walls, on the stairs, everywhere. Scorpio believes if it weren't for him being there, then one, if not both of these men would have surely died. Vader would come out of his hotel room in nothing but his underwear after hearing the screaming and merciless violence. Vader remembers seeing blood pouring out of Sid's belly, so he takes his thumb like something you see out of Vietnam and puts it in Sid's wound to stop the bleeding. According to Too Cold Scorpio, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat never came out of their rooms. Whether this is due to being passed out from intoxication or not wanting any part of this altercation is unknown. According to ProWrestlingStories.com, Richard Steinberg, the WCW official who was directly involved with the incident, reached out to them and said the following. I received a phone call in my room around 2:30 a.m. that there was a major incident and I was needed in the lobby ASAP. I told them to call the tour director or the head of security, but I was told he could not be found. I got dressed and grabbed the elevator down to the first floor. Blood was everywhere, all over the hotel walls leading down the corridor to the lobby. I passed Sid and Arn's room, which were across the hall from each other. Both doors were open, lots of blood and smashed furniture everywhere. I get to the lobby and the entire front glass window of the lobby is smashed out with plate glass broken everywhere all over the place. At this point, I know nothing except what I see. Sid is lying on the floor and bleeding from several wounds. I immediately cover 2 of Sid's wounds with my hands to try and stop the bleeding. I ask for an ambulance and I'm told it's on its way. At this point, I know nothing about Arn. I get in the ambulance with Sid. He is crying all along the way to the hospital that he doesn't want to die. Alternatively, he is telling me that he f***ed up his big chance to be WCW World Champion, but mostly moaning that he didn't want to die. Here's this huge guy crying like a baby. I entered the emergency room with Sid while the doctor treated him. He is crying and still moaning. I don't want to die! The doctor takes a look at his wounds and tells me to leave while he treats him. I walk outside the treatment room and encounter Too Cold Scorpio. He tells me the full story of what happened and that he stayed with Arn during his ambulance ride to the emergency room. I made the decision to contact WCW back in Atlanta immediately. I grabbed a payphone, but of course, it's the middle of the night back in Atlanta, and nobody answers the phone. I leave a message for Bischoff and return to Scorpio. Scorpio and I remained in charge of the 2 guys. Scorpio finally left and I stayed at the hospital for several more hours. I got back to the hotel and netted the police there and Doug Dillinger, the WCW security guy. I grabbed a couple of hours of sleep. In the morning, I received a call from Atlanta telling me to remain in Blackburn with Sid and Arn while the tour continued to the next cities. So I remained behind the tour to deal with potential police charges and extensive damage to the hotel. I had the hotel calculate the entire amount of damages and fax the information back to Atlanta. WCW then increased the limit on my company Visa card and I paid the bill at the hotel. Sid would have to have quote-unquote exploratory surgery for his wounds, while Arn had to practically be patched up from head to toe. Neither man would press charges on the other. For some reason, a police officer would tell Sid that Arn didn't have a scratch on him, trying to get Sid to sue him. Sid was planning on pressing charges until a nurse told him that his friend was really messed up. Sid would then decide not to sue Arn Anderson. However, Arn in return would ultimately try to sue Sid, with Sid having to pay $20,000 for a lawyer. Of all the people in the world, Arn was the last person I wouldn't want to do that to anybody. But he would be the last person in the world I would want to hurt. He had been good to me as a person. I don't know what he might have said behind my back, but face to face he was always a gentleman, but I can only assume he was like that at all times and felt like that. So I later asked, what does Arn say? They said Arn said he was so f***ed up he can't remember anything. WCW President Eric Bischoff would go on to fire Sid Vicious after several wrestlers threatened to walk out if he was not terminated. Sid has since apologized to Arn Anderson for the incident, and the pair are on good terms today. Sid Vicious would return to WCW 6 years later after a stint in the WWE. Many people criticized WCW's handling of the incident at the time. However, Eric Bischoff says there were so many different versions of the story that it was hard to cut down what had actually happened. Bischoff would also go on to say that Arn's friend Ric Flair would pull many strings to keep him in the company. Bischoff says that the decision to fire Sid ultimately came down to the fact that none of this would have happened if Sid had never went back to Arn Anderson's hotel to instigate all of this in the first place.